Hello everybody, my name is Brady and we are back with another React video, and today we're going to be checking out more Hamilton. It really has been a while since I've checked out Hamilton. These were such popular videos on my channel. Then I took a little break, a week turned into a month and so on, and it seemed like I was never going to do them again. But it feels like I should go back and finish the remaining Hamilton songs. There really aren't that many left, and a lot of you wanted me to do the King George III songs, which should be a lot of fun. Having a character that really represents the British, I think that would be a really cool thing to talk about. And it's been a while since I really had the opportunity to talk about the American Revolution in general, and that's kind of my thing. You guys might forget that I actually know a thing or two about history in very narrow periods. I just have to be talking about the stuff that I really know. So I'm very excited to talk about something a little bit closer to my area of study, a little bit, something I study a little bit closer. So this should be really cool. So let's get this started and do the breakdown. Oh yeah, it's a szin Animatic. Does fantastic work. They're great.
The price of my love is not a price that you're willing to pay. You cry in your tea, which you hurl in the sea when you see me go by.
So what is the price of his love? There's this concept called salutary neglect, and it kind of explains the relationship between the old British and these new British that are going to be the Americans. It's really fascinating. For so long, they come over, they colonize, and more or less, the people in America are left to kind of govern themselves. They develop their own culture. They're not really taxed the same way people are at home, and they become used to running the show themselves. So after the 7 Years' War, the British decide they're going to clamp down a little bit. We need funds. Money is not really good right now. Let's get those funds from the colonies. The colonies are not used to that sort of behavior. And that's one of the big things. Like, maybe the American Revolution would have happened regardless, because Americans had developed this culture of independence long before they declared independence. While they liked the idea of the king for the longest time, he may have already lost them before any of the actual rebelling happened. It was just a matter of time. The second they decide, hey, we're going to assert our control a little bit more, something bad likely would have happened. So it's really interesting. And of course he references the Boston Tea Party, which is one of the big impactful responses, because the East India Company was given a virtual monopoly in the Americas to sell tea. That's interesting. And then we ended up having this big boycott because the tea would be taxed, while the tea would have been actually cheaper, which is the funny part. It actually would have been cheaper. They disagreed on the principle of the tax. Therefore, they ended up rebelling. Also, they liked a lot of that illegal Dutch tea, which was not taxed because it was smuggled and illegal. And the British were also cracking down on the illegal tea as well. So that's definitely a contributing factor.
Why so sad? Remember we made an arrangement when you went away. Now you're making me mad. Remember, despite our estrangement, I'm your man.
And when he says we made an arrangement, it seemed like it was implied on his side, but the Americans didn't really see it that way. They thought, hey, we're going over here at great risk to ourselves, trying to make a life over here, and we're going to do our own thing. That's what a lot of them actually saw it as. And he thought, like, no, we get to assert our power whenever we really feel like it. We're letting you be for now, but Now it's time for you to pay up. It's time for you to be part of the larger British Empire, which the Americans were just not accustomed to. So, yeah, and the I'm your man thing. I think it's interesting pointing out King George's place in the American Revolution as this larger figure that means so much more than just his own identity. It's just this larger idea of a monarch looming over them. And the Americans, for so long, were just anti-Parliament, but they kind of liked the idea of King George. He seemed like a pretty cool guy. And not until Thomas Paine wrote a book called Common Sense, which, as far as like Enlightenment texts go, is one of the biggest condemnations of monarchy, of kings, of arbitrary rule. Not until that came around did Americans start to publicly turn on King George, which was like right before the revolution as we know it really kicked off like violently, which is really interesting. As far as figures in the Enlightenment, a lot of them had like vaguely anti-monarchical writing, but none were quite as overt as Thomas Paine's.
You'll be back, soon you'll see. You remember you belong to me. You'll be back, time will tell. You remember that I served you well. Oceans rise, empires fall. We have seen each other through it all. And when push comes to shove, I will send a fully armed battalion to remind you of my love. Da-da.
So that's a pretty aggressive turn we have there. He goes from this very friendly rhetoric to this very violent rhetoric. Which, does that reflect King George? Well, I don't know about that, but he was very persistent compared to Parliament when it came to cracking down on the Americans. Parliament are going to be at odds with him, while the Americans are at odds with both of them. And it's really interesting. While Americans were actually more anti-Parliament than they were anti-King, the king is probably the one who really wanted to fight for the American colonies a little bit more. Parliament is going to come along and be like, hey, this isn't worth it, and they just pull the rug out from under him. So that's really interesting. The Americans wanted to like King George more, but their perception of him was all wrong. The Americans were crazy. They were just completely delusional as to who was and who wasn't on their side. There was a lot of conspiratorial thought going around at the time, as occurs on the eve of revolutions. You start to think like people are out to get you, people in the government. In this case, they were talking about Parliament. But King George was the one who was a little bit more out to get them, I would say. And not necessarily, that's not on the face of it a condemnation of him. He was just more persistent.
You say our love is draining and you can't go on. You'll be the one complaining when I am gone.
So they'll be the one. So there comes the question: what happens after they separate from the British? Do they maintain their current system? Do they put a new king in? And I guess that's the big question that comes regarding Parliament and republicanism and all that sort of stuff. Like, can they maintain a new system that is more free than the British system? I know we're talking about a monarchy here, but the British are still, relative to the other European nations, very, very free. I guess you do have to say relative to the other European nations, because today we'll look at their system and we might think, I don't know. I don't know if that necessarily applies perfectly here, but they were on like the more progressive, I guess, wing of things when it came to personal liberty and that sort of stuff. So it kind of fit the American style. Why would they get away from that? You want something better than that? So it's interesting to look at it that way, to look at the British as these like liberals among Europeans, when the Americans are somehow seeking something more radical. Like, how are you going to do that? Americans ended up being relatively conservative in their new government, but they took a lot from the very liberal British system. It was more conservative than a lot of the revolutions that would follow it, like the French Revolution. That's like crazy radical liberal stuff. But we'll talk about that again at some point in the near future. We can't escape the French Revolution for long on this channel.
No, don't change the subject, 'cause you're my favorite subject. My sweet, submissive subject. My royal subject. Forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. You'll be back like before. I will fight the fight and win the war. For your love, for your praise, and I'll love you till my dying days.
There's a lot of implications around King George's mental health, and if you know anything about King George III, he ended up going a bit mad. But that wasn't until much later. They're planting seeds here, but that's really not as much related to the story that would occur during the American Revolution. I don't think that happens till like the 1810s. He starts to really become a problem. It was towards the end. Maybe he had some little seeds there, but yeah, he didn't seem to be losing it at this stage. So if any of you are like wondering about like them planting those little seeds of his madness, no, that's more of just a reference to something that he would experience rather than what he was experiencing during this. Some people like to tie his eventual madness to the American Revolution and try to like somehow fit those things together. I don't think they necessarily fit together all that well. Another fun thing about this, it creates like the moral question of whether or not you can find a people's loyalty by subduing them. Whether you can beat somebody into submission like that. Even if the British did take back the American colonies, would things have ever been able to be all right? Would there have been another American Revolution around the corner? To a certain degree, I feel like the Americans may have been more trouble than they were worth, even if they did win them back in these cases. When he talks about like sending a battalion or fighting the war for their love, for their loyalty and all that. When he implies that, is that truly possible? There are plenty of people who have been conquered and develop a loyalty to the conqueror over generations. But it's never really perfect, so I don't know how well that ever would have worked out for him. But that's playing with alternate history. That's called historical fiction, my friend.
And you're gone, I'll go mad. So don't
There it is.
throw away this thing we had. 'Cause when push comes to shove, I will kill your friends and family to remind you of my love. Da 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 da.
He he wanted to just aggressively put this down early on. He didn't want this to snowball into something bigger, and then it really just goes over, and I'll go mad. Oh, that, yeah. Not quite yet. Wait until the like 1810s or so for it to get really bad. What triggered his madness was not the American Revolution, though it may have contributed with mental health. Things get worse with repeated trauma, in a sense. You could consider, it's hard to study this because there's so few people who would experience this sort of stuff, but I'd imagine losing the American colonies was probably very traumatic for him. But a lot of it was his a mixture of physical health. I believe he lost a daughter leading up to like his snap moment. And there wasn't really like a snap moment, but when it started getting like way worse, it nosedive. But yeah, that might have been a huge contributor. It's more complicated than the Americans being involved in that. So it's not like the Americans declared independence, won the war, and like he was just broken by that. I think there were plenty of other factors. Could it have possibly contributed? Could that have been something kind of looming over his head that was not good for his mental health? Yeah, absolutely. That's totally possible that it contributed. People are complex creatures, so it's very possible that having that memory did not help his mental health. Is that the dance he does on the stage? What a wonderful song! Just as standalone songs, that one's a beast. I really enjoyed that. So we got to talk about a lot of fun stuff. I think King George is a great tool for exposition and that sort of stuff. He brings out the little references to himself, but he can represent himself being the king, being the idea of monarchy, something that the Americans were kind of struggling with. He can represent the British on the whole. Like I really enjoy the potential for a character like that and what it can bring to telling little bits of history while moving a plot forward. I thought that was a really cool bit there. But yeah, didn't exactly go mad because of the American Revolution. I think that's one of the big misconceptions about King George III. And I'm not sure where that one comes from. For those of you who are interested in some fun historical movies, let me check something here, because I think it might be on Hulu, because that would be so great. Okay, there's a movie called The Madness of King George, and it's a King George. Is it King George III? The Madness of King George. It's on. You can get it on Hulu if you have the HBO package, or I believe it's on HBO Max. But I highly recommend it. It's a comedy, but I find that some of the better historical films are comedies, and that is kind of because it can allow you to have little historical gaffes, but it's like, okay, it's a comedy. But you can also fit in some of the fun little references and whatever, and it's so easy to remember comedy. Comedy sticks with you in such a fun way. So The Madness of King George, check it out if you have HBO Max, because it's definitely worth it. There's just this wonderful scene. Like I have it in my head. You're a patient. You'll appreciate it if you see it. So thank you guys for watching. If you want me to continue the Hamilton videos, I guess I will. I don't have that much left to do. I may as well finish the series. It's one of those series that I can absolutely finish. So I probably should. This isn't like the extra history stuff where there's like 700 videos. It's probably not 700. It's probably closer to 300 or 400. But like an unrealistic amount of videos for me to finish. I could have this finished in a couple weeks if I really go all in on it. Maybe I should. Let me know. All right. Thank you guys, and I will see you tomorrow with another video. All right. Bye.